So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, the Detroit Lions have gone through mandatory minicamp. They've gone through all 3 weeks of OTAs, and now we don't get to see the Lions for a couple weeks, right? We don't really get to see anything about the Detroit Lions until training camp comes around in a few weeks from now. And then, of course, we get the preseason, and then we get on to the regular season of football. But after getting a few opportunities to see this Detroit Lions team, after getting 3 weeks of OTAs and a week of mandatory minicamp, we've gotten a pretty good look at what players are starting to stand out, what players could potentially be pushing for bubble roster spots, as well as what players could potentially eventually make up a 53-man roster. And today I wanted to take an early preview of the Detroit Lions' final 53. Now today I'm going to focus solely on the offensive side of the ball, and tomorrow we'll do the defensive side of the ball. But for today, I wanted to take a look at the 2023 Detroit Lions offense, talk about how good it can be, what different roles players are going to play, where different players are going to slide in, what players could potentially be dark horses for roster spots, and just kind of give an all-around good idea of what this 2023 Detroit Lions team could look like moving in as we approach training camp and the preseason. Now, starting off with the quarterback room, obviously, Jared Goff is going to be your quarterback one. He was a top 10 statistical quarterback a season ago, was very productive, didn't turn the football over. I believe had 29 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. 29 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. He was incredibly efficient and incredibly productive for the Detroit Lions, and pretty much did everything that you want a quarterback to do. Yeah, he struggled with the deep ball at times, but he also hit a lot of deep balls very, very well. He worked really well in the intermediate and short passing games. He got the football out quick. He made smart decisions. And despite not being, I'd say, a top 10 quarterback talent-wise in the NFL, he played statistically like a top 10 quarterback a season ago, and he doesn't need to be Patrick Mahomes scrambling around. If he replicates what he did a season ago, if he can be decisive, if he can get the ball out quick, if he can get the ball to the number of wide receivers he now has on the roster, I think he is going to be, again, a top 10 statistical quarterback and be a very good one in the NFL, helping lead the Lions potentially to a division title and a couple playoff wins. Now, I think Hendon Hooker is going to be quarterback too. There's a lot of people saying that he's not going to be healthy in time. There's a lot of people saying he's going to start the season on the PUP list, and that is very possible. I think it's very, very possible that he does end up on the physically unable to perform list, or maybe IR, depending on how far he is along with his ACL recovery. But he is already throwing after practices at mini camps and at OTAs, and with a couple weeks still left for him to improve and get healthy, I see no reason why Hendon Hooker can't at least be partially ready to go by the start of training camp, and then another month and a half after that, why he can't be 100% ready to go by week 1. His doctor said that that was the timeline. They expected him to be physically ready to perform and physically ready to play football by time week 1 of the NFL season rolls around. So even if he's 80 to 90% through the preseason, I think the Lions will go with him as their quarterback too, if he is going to be ready by week 1, which leads Adrian Martinez to be quarterback 3. Now, I don't think Adrian Martinez is going to be on the active roster. I think he's going to be that third quarterback, the new role that the San Francisco 49ers essentially brought up and said, hey, we want an emergency quarterback on the roster so we don't have to carry 3 necessarily and waste a roster spot. But therefore, if injuries do arise, like what happened in the NFC Championship, then the NFL team at least has another backup and has a chance in the football game. The Lions and every other NFL team are now able to carry 3 quarterbacks without that third quarterback going against the roster spot. And I think that quarterback is going to be Adrian Martinez. If Hendon Hooker is healthy and quarterback 2, there's no reason to really keep around Nate Sudfeld, because Hendon Hendon Hooker does everything at a higher level. So why not bring in a guy with a different play style? Why not bring in a guy that can play kind of a wildcat quarterback? Why not bring in a guy that can bring a rushing essence to your team and add a new dynamic element to the offense? Now, moving on to the running back position, again, this one's pretty chalked up, but I think David Montgomery is going to make it. They just paid him 3 years, $18 million. He's going to be the bell cow of this offense. Jahmyr Gibbs, the first round pick, is going to make the roster. I think is going to be more of a receiver, but will get a healthy amount of rushing attack as well. Craig Reynolds, the kind of Cinderella story from 2021, I think is going to make the roster if he is healthy. Missed a lot of 2022 with injuries, but he was really, really good in 2021, and I think will return to an RB3 role, while the Big Ten's reigning leading rusher is going to be the RB4. Mohamed Ibrahim was phenomenal in college as a Minnesota Gopher, and I think will come into the NFL as a RB4. I think he'll get a little bit of goal line work. I think he might get a little bit of short yardage work. I think he'll be one of those impressive players in the preseason, and I think he makes the roster eventually as the running back 4. And then I think the Lions keep a fullback. It's not very common for the NFL to keep a fullback anymore, but the Lions love themselves some Jason Kabinda. Again, was hurt a lot to start last season, but I think he will return to play, and the Lions really like him as a football player, as a locker room presence, and we had the roster spot to spare. Moving on to the wide receivers, I think the wide receiving core is going to be looking something like this. Obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Marvin Jones, Tom Kennedy. Now, obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Marvin Jones, Khalif Raymond, and Josh Reynolds are all going to make the roster. I think those 4 are absolute locks. I don't think it matters what they do in the preseason. I don't think it matters what they're going to do during camp. I think those 4 guys are going to make the roster and be your starting 4 wide receivers on day 1. Now, I do believe with the suspension of Jameson Williams, that will open up a spot for Tom Kennedy to definitively make the roster after the preseason, at least for the first 6 weeks, and he will be on the roster. And I think they will keep Antoine Green, the 7th round selection from North Carolina. He's a player that I think will add a big play threat to the Detroit Lions offense in the absence of Jameson Williams. And with Jameson Williams being on suspension, he isn't going to count against the NFL's 53-man roster rule. He's going to be on a special suspension list, meaning he won't count actively against a roster spot, meaning you can keep these 6 wide receivers with St. Brown in your slot, Amon-Ra St. Brown in your slot, Marvin Jones as your X wide receiver, Khalif Raymond as either Y or a deep threat or a potential slot wide receiver and kick Amon-Ra St. Brown outside. Josh Reynolds can be a Z wide receiver. Tom Kennedy can be a slot. And I think Antoine Green will be a Z or an X wide receiver at points during the season because of his speed and big playability. He has the ability to get deep. He has the ability to create separation, to make big plays, averaged 19.7 yards per reception at North Carolina throughout his entire career. He's a big play throughout waiting to happen, and I think he will end up making the roster. Now, there are a couple other UDFA wide receivers, a couple other young guys that I think will make the practice squad, but we will talk about those guys in a little bit. Moving on to the tight end position, I think the Detroit Lions only carried 3 tight ends, with 1 tight end on the practice squad likely getting called up most of the weeks. Sam Laporta is going to make your active roster. He has to. He's a 2nd-round pick. He's already making plays at camp. He is a very good player, and I think he will be the best tight end on the Detroit Lions roster in 2023. Now, Brock Wright, I think, is also in a very secure position for the tight end battle. He is the security blanket. He is the guy that Jared Goff has chemistry with. He is the guy that consistently comes up with big plays in big moments, especially versus the Jets, especially on 3rd down in the red zone. Brock Wright always seems to be open and always seems to be making tough catches in big moments. And I think he will stay on the Detroit Lions roster, potentially starting the season as the tight end 1, but eventually fading back and giving Sam Laporta and James Mitchell a little bit more time to shine in the passing game. And that leads me to my 3rd tight end. I think James Mitchell, the 5th-round pick from Virginia Tech 2 seasons ago, is going to make the roster as the 3rd and final tight end. Him and Sam Laporta, I think, will both be mismatches on the Detroit Lions offense, both of whom are really good receiving weapons at the tight end position, both of whom can create separation, both of whom can get vertical, both of whom have very strong hands and yak ability. They are very similar players in terms of play style, and I think they will both be big matchup nightmares for the Detroit Lions offense, and I wouldn't be surprised if they combine for 80 to 90 targets. And if the 2 combined get close to 900 or 1,000 yards on the season, because I think the tight ends will be used a lot, and I do not think there are a ton of linebacker safety duos in the NFL that can stop these 3 tight ends in the receiving game, especially with an emphasis on Laporta and Mitchell. Now, the starting offensive line at least, is pretty set in standard. right? Taylor Decker is going to be your left tackle, potentially a Pro Bowl season incoming. He's been very good for the last however many seasons he's been in Detroit now. I think he's on year 8, maybe, but he is a really, really good football player. He is a phenomenal left tackle. I'm kind of surprised he hasn't made a Pro Bowl yet, but he is a Pro Bowl level tackle. Jonah Jackson has made a Pro Bowl as the left guard. He's looking for a contract extension, so look out for a big season from him. Frank Ragnow, the all-pro caliber center and Pro Bowler from a season ago, will be returning as the starting center. Big V, a player that has not allowed a single sack since moving to right guard, will be the starting right guard for the Detroit Lions in 2023. And then, of course, Penei Sewell, former top 10 pick, the Pro Bowl offensive lineman, Pro Bowl right tackle for the Detroit Lions, will be making his 3rd consecutive starting season at the right tackle position for the Detroit Lions, and expect a big season from him as well. The Detroit Lions offensive line, in my opinion, is at least top 3, if not the best in the NFL. They are Pro Bowl caliber at all 5 spots, and I think all pro caliber at 2 of those spots. All 5 of these players, I think, can make the Pro Bowl in 2023, and 2 of them, likely Ragnow or Sewell, can be all pros in the 2023 season. I think they have arguably the best offensive line in all of football. But what about the depth of the offensive line? I think the Detroit Lions carry 4 depth players into the 2023 season. First of which is going to be Graham Glasgow, a player that has center guard versatility, a player that has started for both the Detroit Lions and the Denver Broncos and has been pretty good at both locations, with the exception, of course, of last season where he led the NFL in sacks allowed. But I think Graham Glasgow, worst case scenario, is a top end backup guard, and at worst case scenario is going to start as your, guard. He's going to be a below average guard, but a starting caliber guard nonetheless. Now, Rosh Pearsonbacher is going to be, I think, the backup center. Although Graham Glasgow has that versatility, he hasn't played center in quite a long time. And from what I've heard, Piersbacher is very impressive, is taking a lot of center 2 plays as well as center 1 plays when Frank Ragnow has been sitting out at OTAs. I think Matt Nelson is going to be pretty much the sole tackle depth. I think he is going to be a player that has played both left and right tackle in the NFL, has started at both left and right tackle in the NFL. It's somebody that the Lions really like. He's somebody who's stepped in before and done a really good job. And I think he will step in and be that guy for the Detroit Lions in 2023. And then Colby Sorsdale, the 5th round pick from William and Mary, player that the Detroit Lions coaching staff has already fallen in love with, a player that the Detroit Lions coaching staff is very, very high on, likely won't crack the starting 5 early in his career. But if Jonah Jackson leaves, if Big V leaves next offseason, there is a position where by the time we're talking about him in 2024, we could be talking about Colby Sorsdale as a potential starting guard on the Detroit Lions offensive line. And I think he will not only make the roster, but I think he is going to be one of those players the Lions keep under wraps. And by the time 2024 rolls around, if Big V ends up leaving, they don't have a player to easily replace him, I think Colby Sorsdale is going to slide in easily at that right guard position and be the heir apparent to Halapaloe Vaitai. Now, with that being said, that is the roster as I see it on the offensive side of the ball. Now, as of right now, that is how I see the Detroit Lions offensive side of the ball shaking out. That leaves the Detroit Lions with 26 players on offense, being a pretty balance between offensive and defensive personnel. And like I said, that doesn't mean every offensive player that isn't mentioned won't make the roster. I think there's a lot of players on the offense that are going to end up making the practice squad. Guys like Chase Cota, guys like Connor Galvin at tackle, guys like Jamar Jefferson, Dylan Drummond. There's a lot of offensive players that I think will be stashed on the practice squad if they make it through waiver wires, which I think a lot of them will as undrafted rookies. Not many people are going to know about them, but as of right now, that is how I see the Detroit Lions offense looking, right? I think they're going to carry 3 quarterbacks because of the 3 quarterback rule. I think they're going to carry essentially 5 running backs, as they are a team that's going to look to run the football a lot in 2023. Their wide receiving core is going to look a little thin, but those 6 wide receivers are the best ones on the roster. And again, if you consider the fact that Laporta and Mitchell are going to take a healthy amount of targets, then you really essentially have 8 or 9 wide receivers on the roster. And then, of course, the strong offensive line to go with it, with the depth at all 3 positions. I think they have 2 guards potentially right? I think they have 2 guards potentially on the reserve with Sorsdale and Glasgow. I think they have 2 centers potentially with Pierschbacher and Glasgow. And then they have the tackle of Corby Sorsdale, who's played right tackle throughout college. And then Matt Nelson, who's played it in the NFL. So that is 26 players on the offense. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about probably the 26 to 27 players on defense as well as special teams. And then we will take a look at the entire practice squad and go over really what this 53-man roster can look like for the Detroit Lions in 2023. But with all that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below, what players would you change? What players would you put in the active lineup? What players would you put on the practice squad? And what players would you just outright cut from the Detroit Lions 2023 roster? Be very curious what you guys have to say and what you guys think about this scenario. But with all that being said, thank you all so much for watching. If you have not subscribed yet, please make sure you're down below and do so if you enjoyed the content, and hit that bell notification so you never miss a Detroit Lions upload. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions!